is was dealing with rice, and initially the Gemara now proved wrong Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel did not want to recite a mezainis on rice, and the Gemara proved them wrong from a brisa, which said that a mezainis is appropriate on rice. It talked about tachnoi, afai, uvishloi. Tachnoi means you ground the rice, then you baked it, then you cooked it, and so you made some type of like a bread out of it, and then you cook this bread in water. But ultimately, the Gemara says that the bracha is going to be mezainis on that on that rice. And the Gemara said that there is a view of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri who says rice is just like bread. According to that view, the halacha would be that it would depend if the rice bread that you cooked and that you baked and cooked, if it's prusois kayomais, if the pieces are still intact. If the pieces are intact, they don't break apart when you pull it. So if so, then it would have the halacha that it would be a hamoitzi lechem min haaretz. It would be really like the law of bread. You would say grace after meal afterwards. But if it's not intact, then it would have the mezainis bracha. That would be according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, the Gemara understands, because that would be the law with wheat. Wheat would be the same thing. However, when it comes to rice, our brisa says a different view. It doesn't matter if it's intact or not intact. The bracha is going to be mezainos. And that means that this is the rabbi's view. It's not Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's view, because we're not differentiating with whether it's intact or not. So this is the rabbi's view. And you see, there is a blessing of mezainos on rice. And again, we understood it. We discussed maybe the reason behind it has to do with the fact that obviously we're seeing rice as being a source of a major source of sustenance, and that would be why it would be given this bracha mezainos. It's not from the 7 species, but it is, it is definitely a source of sustenance, and the Gemara understands that it would get a mezainos, contrary to what Rav and Shmuel wanted to say, that it's totally not within the category of mezainos. Rav and Shmuel said it's different than the 5 grains, that 5 grains get a blessing mezainos, which are primary sources of sustenance. They held rice would not be included in that. And here, the Gemara says we have a source in a brisa. The rabbis hold that it does get a mezainos. So we've proven Rav and Shmuel wrong. The term used in the Gemara is called tiyufta. Tiyufta de Rav and Shmuel. We have proven Rav and Shmuel wrong. But I did mention the Gemara is going to discuss it further. And so don't think that we've concluded the discussion of rice yet. Yes, Robert.
My apologies to you and everyone in class. I'm following this on Safaria. So we're still in Barachat 36a?
We're actually 37a.
Okay, great. Thank you. I need to get there. Thank you. I've been catching up. I apologize.
Yeah. Well, from my introduction, I'm hoping you'll be able to follow with us.
Yeah, I'm doing it. Yeah, I'm doing it now. Thank you.
Catch up after. I don't think you'll. Hopefully you won't. Hopefully my introduction is good enough to at least understand the class.
Absolutely. I'm there now. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yes, David.
Yeah, if the verse that has the 5 species is very specific, it's wheat, barley, oats, it doesn't include rice. So how could this rabbi come along and say rice is included in mezainos if it's not one of the 5 species in the verse?
Right, that's a good question. And the only thing is the verse doesn't really mention all 5 grains. The verse only mentions 2 grains. It mentions wheat and barley. But the understanding is based on a Talmudic discussion, I believe in Pesachim. It mentions that wheat includes spelt and barley includes oats and rye. Now, I don't understand grain so much, so I don't know the explanation how that works. Why is spelt a type of wheat, and why is oats and rye a type of barley? But that's obviously understood for people who understand the way things grow and the way things are. Now, the fact that rice would get a mezainis, and according to one rabbi, it's even considered like the grain. It's a regular grain. It would even be hamaitzi. This is your question. It's not only according to that one view that it's hamaitzi. You could ask the question, why should it be given a bracha mezainis? But the answer is that the way we're seeing it is the bracha of hamaitzi or mezainis is not based necessarily on being from the 7 species. Obviously, there's an element of primary source of grain, of sustenance that this has, even though many things could give sustenance, but these would be primary sources of sustenance. According to one rabbi, it's all about that. That's what it all boils down to. We'd even have a hamaitzi. So again, the verse is not telling us what will get a bracha mezainis. The verse is discussing, the items that Israel is blessed with, and then the verse mentions that v'achalta v'savata uveirachta, you will eat, be satisfied, and bless. So the question would be, how is each rabbi interpreting the verse of you shall eat, be satisfied, and say the grace after meal? Originally, we explained in the beginning of this chapter that there is a thought that verse, eat, be satisfied, and say the grace, might refer to the 7 species. Then we mentioned that that it's not necessarily so. If you say it refers to the 7 species, it would actually change a halacha, and it would mean that the after blessing of the 7 species would actually be biblical. And that's not the commonly accepted view. We normally look at the after blessing of the 7 species as being rabbinic. Bread would be biblical. So the way we commonly understand that verse is not that it's not referring to the 7 species, even though the Gemara had such a thought, and we'll soon see Rabbi Gamliel seems to follow that way of thinking, but that's not the final halacha, and therefore we look at the verse about benching as not connected to the 7 species. The verse about benching is about eating something that is a primary source of sustenance. People eat their meal on, base their meal on, and they say grace after meal, and they will be satisfied and say grace after meal. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, he obviously looks at rice as a staple food that people would use for their, this would be a primary source of sustenance. And therefore, he would give the blessing, the grace after meal after such a blessing. The rabbis don't look at it that way because they do not say that it has the same category as bread. Now, exactly what their view is, we have to see all the different scenarios of how the laws play out, and then try to, from all the specific laws, we'll try to get the picture of when, how are they interpreting the verse, and why are they not including rice in that verse? Now, she's not here, but Simone yesterday did send me an email, something to the effect of the nature of the way rice grows, and it was from the Steinsaltz that she took a picture of, and what she mentioned, the main point I think that she was bringing out is within the grain family there is a distinction between the panicoid family that includes millet, rice, and corn, among others, which the Talmud does not consider grain, and the Puidae family, which includes the 5 species of grain. So it seems like there is some farmer language that the way they, in the academic world of farming, that they would divide, they would actually consider the 5 grains different than rice. I know in I think South American countries, they consider rice a very staple food that they base their meals on, I believe. But somehow it seems like there is a difference. In other words, you could see a difference in the way it grows because they consider it a different family.
In China, for sure.
Not just Chinese restaurants. I thought the Chinese restaurants.
No, they grow
they're
it.
tricking us. What the real thing is in China. We don't really know what goes on there.
They grow it in the Far East, Vietnam, China, Korea, all those areas.
In any event, the point is that we don't really know clearly what the reason of the rabbis is at this point, but maybe after we learn the details, we'll try to be able to formulate a view of why the rabbis are going to give rice some in-between status. They're going to get them. It's going to get a mezainis. It won't get it. It'll never be considered like bread. And so this is something that, this is a work in progress. So that's so in any event, the next Gemara
Rabbi, isn't the order taken from Chumash that wheat comes first, barley comes next, rye comes next, oats comes next, and spelt is last? Like if you have
again, it doesn't say rye and oats in that verse. It only talks about wheat. Eretz chita usa'ira, the gefen usa'ena v'rimoin. Eretz zeis shemen udvash. The verse says the land of chita, wheat, and barley, and then it jumps to grapes, gefen usa'ena, and figs, rimoin, pomegranate. So it does not talk about oats and rye. Again, those are understood to be included in the 2 words wheat and barley. So the verse doesn't specify those grains. So again, the previous Gemara proved Rav and Shmuel wrong, and really the bracha on oirez is going to be mezainos. Now, I did mention yesterday that this proof that we've proven Rav and Shmuel wrong, the term in the Gemara is oirez. I translated it as rice because that's the modern translation of the word oirez, but it's not necessarily the correct translation of oirez in the Gemara. Tosfos says that it is rice. Some say yesh mefarshim. Tosfos says rizoi. Oirez is rizoi, is rice, and according to this, doichen is mill, which would be millet. But Rashi doesn't translate it that way. Rashi translates oirez as mill. Oirez means millet. So according to him, the Gemara is not really discussing, well, it doesn't clearly tell us if we've proven Rav and Shmuel wrong regarding rice. So this creates a huge question of what the bracha, so what we know in the Gemara is the bracha on the Talmudic word oirez is mezainos. That we can say. If you have what the Talmud calls oirez, you would recite a mezainos. But what if you have what the Talmud calls doichen, which might be rice, might be millet? There, the Gemara doesn't really conclude what the bracha should be. So, Tosfos over here, a different Tosfos, he says, we've proven Rav and Shmuel wrong about oirez, but we haven't proven them wrong necessarily about doichen. We don't know, is doichen in the same category as oirez, or is doichen in a different category? So it ends up being a big question of what bracha should be on rice, because we don't know what the word oirez is, and there is a reason to say that doichen might be different than oirez. There are Rishonim commentaries that argue on Tosfos, and they say that oirez and doichen are the same. So it doesn't matter what oirez and doichen is, because as long as one of them is rice, that would be fine. But but Tosfos says no. There is a difference. Oirez, the Gemara proves Rav and Shmuel wrong regarding. Doichen maybe not, and therefore there's reason to say a different bracha on rice. Now we will continue again. We're going to continue talking about rice after, but this is so far just to give you the heads up that no matter what we come out with on the Gemara's translation of oirez, it's really not gonna totally satisfy our understanding, because we're still going to be stuck with the fact that we don't know what the Gemara refers to when it says oirez. Now, again, Rashi holds oirez is millet. Tosfos holds oirez is rice. So the next Gemara then mentions that what is the bracha on eating a wheat kernel? And on this, the Gemara said it seems to be a contradiction, because one place it says bar pri adama on eating a wheat kernel, another place it says bar mine zroim. You recite a bracha who created types of seeds. And the Gemara says that this is not a problem, because we remember the opinion of Reb Yehuda in the Mishnah, the first Mishnah that we learned in this chapter. And that Mishnah mentioned that Reb Yehuda believes that we should be reciting very specified brachas. And therefore he said that there is a bracha bar pri ho'adama, but that would refer to only like gourds and melons. And the bracha bar mine dishaim would be herbage. And then he has a bracha of bar mine zroim, which we're learning here, would be on grains. And so he's got a few different categories that he has for the brachas. So again, bar mine zroim, bar mine dishaim, like cabbage, greens. In bar pri ha'adama, it would be like melons, gourds, turnips, and so on. So he wants to specify the brachas, and that would be Rabbi Yehuda's view. Again, we don't follow it, but I think there is a message there, and that is that the idea behind it is about how important it is to thank Hashem and realize the specific acknowledgement that we are thanking Hashem for, using our thought, thinking a little deeper into the brachas. What are we really thanking Hashem for, instead of just shooting out a bracha because we want to eat something? But if we actually think about the bracha a little, and we think about the miracle that Hashem created each thing, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're actually thinking deeper into it, about each item specifically, how it grows. But I guess it's good we don't really follow Rabbi Yehuda, because people nowadays, we just buy stuff in the store. We don't actually know how things grow. So maybe that's benefits us a little, because we wouldn't know how to differentiate probably between the foods, between these different items. In any event, the next Gemara then mentions this, the law of rice. So now we're going back to rice, and the Gemara says Amar Mar, which means master said in a previous statement, like a brisa. Here it was a brisa. Master said that the person who eats, if a person were to eat just a plain kernel of rice, bar pri ha'adama, but if you grind it, you bake it, you then boil it, then the bracha would be mezainos. And what is the after bracha on this oirez? What is the bracha afterwards? So in the brisa said the bracha after it would be just like cake. The bracha after cake is al hamichya. It's called in the Talmud bracha achas me'ein shalosh, the summarized bracha. It summarizes 3 brachas into one. That's we call it an al hamichya. So that was what the brisa said. And then we said, but there's another brisa that says you do not say anything, which means you say the Borei Nefashos. And yesterday we explained what the meaning of Borei Nefashos is. He creates people with their needs, and he fulfills our needs, creates many people, and he fulfills our needs, which is like main staples of food. And he also creates extra things. I'll call Masha Barasa, extra things that we benefit from and have pleasure in. And he uses the term tapuchim, which I translated as citrus fruits because they're based on other Talmudic translation, even though nowadays tapuchim means apples. But it seems like Tosfos is referring to his translation, which is which would be like citrus fruits, which he calls foods that are extras, bonuses for our pleasure. And that's the meaning of the Borei Nefashos. So the question is, after bracha on Oirez, is it, which we're translating as rice, is the after bracha ala michya? One brisa says ala michya, another brisa says Borei Nefashos. So the Gemara answers that there's a difference between Rabbi Gamliel and the rabbis. And we have a brisa. And now we're going to read, let's start with that brisa, Ditanya, because we have a brisa, and this is going to tell us the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel and the opinion of the rabbis. So Ditanya is the last word on the line, and we are 7 lines up from the bottom of 37a. Ditanya. 8 lines up, maybe 8 lines up from the bottom of the page. Ditanya, because we learned in a brisa, and this is going to show us the different views of Rabbi Gamliel and the rabbis. Now, keep in mind that this brisa is going to have 2 parts to it. This is going to be the first part, and then there's going to be another version of Rabbi Yehuda's version of it. And so we're going to be mainly looking for the second half of this brisa, but the Gemara brings the entire brisa. So Ditanya, because we learned in a brisa, Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule.
I'm sorry, I can't find it. I found the Tanya, but it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri after that.
You can't find it. Are you on 37a?
Yeah.
37a.
8 lines up, the Tanya, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer. Okay,
so Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is way up. That's not 8 lines before the end. That's about 25 lines before the end of the page. So you're about 20 lines before where I am. You got to go down another 20 lines.
Go down 20 lines. Okay, so I'm on the next page. Further.
Okay. Well, in the Talmud, there's set pages, and this is called 37a. So it's still on page 37a.
Yeah, it's still page 37a. But then I have Bet Amar Mar. הכוסס החיטה מברך עליה.
Yep.
בורא פרי האדמה.
Yeah. So you got to go further, another 10 lines.
10 lines down.
Another 10 lines down. Okay. So Ditanya, because we learned in a brisa, Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule, Kol shehu mishivas haminim, anything that's from the 7 species, Rabbi Gamliel Omer Shalosh Brochos. Rabbi Gamliel says that after you eat anything from the 7 species, you would recite the grace after meals. And this is jumping back to what David brought up, that there is room, and we saw this on the first page of this chapter, that there's room to say that when it says, V'achalta v'savata ubeirachta, you will eat, be satisfied, and say grace after meal, that might go back onto the verse that says the 7 species. And Reb Gamliel does hold that. And therefore he says here that you would recite all 3 blessings, the grace after meal, even after eating grapes. If you eat 10 grapes, you would recite the full grace after meal. How about 10 olives? If you eat a few dates, how about 4 dates? You would recite the grace after meal. Eat a pomegranate. Recite the full grace after meal, according to Rebbe Gamliel, because when it says the blessing about the grace after meal, it's going back to the verse that mentions the 7 species. And the rabbis argue, the Chachamim say, the rabbis say, bracha achas me'ein shalosh. You would recite a bracha that summarizes those 3, and that is called the Al HaMichya bracha. Now, I call it Al HaMichya, but really the ending of that bracha, or even the beginning, is not always Al HaMichya. It depends if it's fruit, if it's cake, depends what you're eating. If you're eating dates or grapes or olives or pomegranates, you would recite Al Ha'etz v'Al Pri Ha'etz. The cake, we would say Al HaMichya. So, but the common term, you would just call it as Al HaMichya, and that's what the rabbis say, that after anything from the 7 grains, one would recite this. After eating them, you would recite this Al HaMichya or Al Ha'etz blessing. The Rebbe Gamliel said you would say grace after me. Now there's a story here. Ma'aser Rebbe Gamliel. There's a story of Rebbe Gamliel. The Hazakanim and the elders, they were sitting together in a aliyah, in an attic in Jericho. And it was brought before them koisavos. Koisavos are dates. Now, dates are part of the 7 species. It doesn't use the word dates, actually, when it mentions the 7 species. It says the word dvash, honey, because it means dates that honey comes from. But dates are part of the 7 species. And they were sitting together and eating dates. Va'achlu, and they ate them. V'nasan Rabbi Gamliel, Rishus, Rabbi Akiva Labarech. Rabbi Gamliel gave permission for Rabbi Akiva to say the blessing. And the understanding is that Rabbi Gamliel thought that Rabbi Akiva would say the full grace after meal. Why? Because Rabbi Gamliel holds that you're supposed to say grace after meal after eating dates. So he figured, okay, let's do the grace after meal. Rabbi Akiva, lead the grace after meals. And when you lead the grace, in the olden days, the way it worked was that person actually had intention to fulfill everyone's obligation, and everyone else would just say amen. That was the common way it was done. And so Rabbi Gamliel gave permission to Rabbi Akiva to say the grace after meal. And what did he do? Kafatz, he jumped, and he didn't want Rabbi Gamliel to tell him off. So that's why the term is he jumped. Uberach, Rabbi Akiva, bracha achas mein shalish. Rabbi Akiva said he didn't do the full grace after meal. What did he do? He said the Al HaMichya bracha, which is really Al Ha'etz. He said the blessing after fruits, which is this summarized version of the grace after meal. So Amalei Rabbi Gamliel. So Rabbi Gamliel said to him, to Rabbi Akiva, why are you mixing into this argument? I debated these other rabbis. Why are you mixing in into this debate that I have with the other rabbis? You know, follow what I said. Don't mix in. Don't start taking their side and so on. So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Akiva answered him, Rabbeinu, Master, even though I know you say that it should be the grace after meal, after eating dates, and the rabbis, your friends, they say the other thing. They say you should say Al HaMichya, Al Ha'etz. But Limad Tana Rabbeinu, our master, taught us Yachid V'Rabim Halacha K'Rabim, that when there's an argument between an individual and a large group, the halacha follows the group, and I have to follow them. I know I like you. I know you're in charge. But, you know, Rabbi Gamliel was considered like the Nasi, the leader. But at the same time, all the other rabbis argued on his view. And in that case, in that scenario, even though he might be the leader, very sharp and knowledgeable, but at the same time, we go by the majority. We follow the majority, and the majority of rabbis argue on you. So Rabbi Gamliel, I have to follow the majority. Sorry. Halacha karabim, the halacha follows the majority. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Mishmai, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Gamliel, a little different thing, and this is the second half of this brisa. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, Kol shu mishevas haminim, anything that comes from the 7 species, and now we turn the page to 37b. Anything that's from the 7 species, v'loy min doganhu, and it's not a type of grain. Or oy min dagan v'lo yasoy pas, or it's a type of grain, but you did not make bread out of it. So it's either from the 7 species, meaning from the fruits of the 7 species, or it's from the grain of the 7 species, but you did not make bread out of it. Rabbi Gamliel says, shalosh brachos. The final blessing is the grace after meal. And the rabbis say, bracha achas, one blessing, which means a summary of the grace after meal. Anything that's not from the 7 species, and it's not a grain, what would an example be? For example, pas oirez v'doichen, bread made from rice and doichen, which is millet and rice. Rabbi Gamliel says, bracha achas mi'ein shalosh, you would say, after you eat this bread, you would recite a bracha al hamichya. The rabbis would say, Beirei nefashos. So this is where we're going to have to stop. But what we see here is that there is a view of Rabbi Gamliel about what bracha to say after rice. And there's a view of the rabbis what bracha to say after rice. Rabbi Gamliel says it would be an al hamichya, and the rabbis would say it would be a beirei nefashos. And this will be a subject of discussion tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, because is this the way to answer the contradiction we had before? We had a contradiction before that one place it says on rice, you would recite a al hamichya afterwards. In another place it said you would recite a beirei nefashos. Could we say that this is Rabbi Gamliel in the rabbis? And at this point, the Gemara thinks, yes, we're going to explain that one place is Rabbi Gamliel and the other place is the rabbis. Tomorrow, we'll see that that doesn't really fit. Have a wonderful day. Sei gesund. We'll see you later. Mitzvah Hashem.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi. Bye-bye.